Welcome to Careers and Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they'd give to their younger selves.
Welcome back to Careers and Discovery. Today I'm joined by Chelsea Trengrove, CEO and co-founder of Neoclease. Welcome, Chelsea.
Hi, Emma. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Shall we start off talking a little bit about you and the work that you're doing at Neoclease?
Sure. So just to give a little bit of a background on what we're building at Neoclease, really we're focused on building new genetic medicines. We've looked at the landscape of gene editors and genetic medicines, and there have been these huge gains over the past decade. We've seen the first approvals of the CRISPR-Cas9 system for sickle cell, with some of these therapies now, proving to almost be curative. I mean, that's really the promise of these gene editors, is that you can go into the DNA and correct a genetic mutation with potentially just a single treatment. So it's a really exciting time in the industry. But, looking at the landscape, there are still a number of hurdles that need to be overcome. There are issues around safety and specificity. Most of the editors that are used today are very large. And so looking at some of these barriers, we really believe that the problem with gene editing today is because of the industry's focus on a one-size-fits-all approach. So using a single protein like Cas9 or Cas12 to really try and target the entire spectrum of the human genome, which is great for some use cases like ex vivo editing or liver editing, where maybe for ex vivo editing, you can cell sort and put the cells back into the body, which is also an expensive process. But at Neoclease, really our thesis or our hypothesis is that if you create editors that are optimized for an individual gene, so more of like a small molecule approach to genetic medicine design, you can create safer and more efficacious gene editors. And so at Neoclease, we're focused on building gene editors that are optimized for an individual gene target, which is a little bit of a different approach to what we've seen in the industry to date. And we're only able to do this using a generative AI technology. So we've trained right now it's mainly a language model, but trained on different features as well. So it's this large model that has been trained on 3 million known proteins that can cut the DNA. So that's different types of gene editors like CRISPR-Cas9, but then also different types of Cases and nucleases, looking at zinc fingers and talons. We have a lot of interest in recombinases. We've taken all of this data, sort of tokenized it into this model, different features of these editors. And so we can now tell the model to generate specific editors that have features that we would need for a gene of interest. So right now we're focused on Parkinson's disease. And what we've been able to do now is look at this target gene in Parkinson's and sort of back build from there and say, what kind of editor would be that sort of perfect lock and key fit for that gene? Design 1 million editors that have those features. And then obviously not all of those are going to function as we've told the model to build it. And so then we have this computational evaluation pipeline that's a series of checkpoints and gates to really say, okay, these are the editors that are going to perform predicted to perform the best in the wet lab when we then go in to sort of test it in the typical sort of drug development pathway. So yeah, that's a kind of a high level overview.
Yeah. Can I ask, how do you decide when there are so many different disease areas and where this technology can be used across so many? How do you decide where to focus? How did you end up deciding to put your time in Parkinson's?
Yeah, there's perhaps a little bit of bias there. I did my PhD in neuroscience at Boston University, and I was specifically focused on Parkinson's disease in a lab that was really mostly targeted to neurodegeneration. And I was looking at a specific pathway within the LRRK2 gene, which is the target that we're now going after. So perhaps some bias, but we actually did do this larger landscape analysis of different genetic targets that we could go after. We mainly looked at monogenic diseases, so diseases that only have one gene that are impacting an outcome of a disease, something like Huntington's, sickle cell is a good one as well. And and looked everywhere from in the very early development of the pipeline. Is this something that we can create an editor for, a nuclease for, that's going to be able to target this gene in silico and in the cloud? And then is it something that we can bring into the wet lab, readily validate in vitro, in animal models? Is this something that has a lot of sort of literature and data backing this up as a good preclinical or clinical target? Is it something that can be translated into clinical trials? And then is it going to be commercially viable? And of course, most importantly, is this going to be disease modifying for patients? I mean, ideally, we'd like to go after a curative therapy, but we really feel like the opportunity with Parkinson's is so large. To date, sort of the treatment therapy for Parkinson's has been a symptomatic approach. So really treating the symptoms as opposed to the underpinnings of Parkinson's. And so we feel like this is a first therapy that could actually slow progression of the disease, which would be really a big gain for patients that have the disease. So it's a big part of why we decided to go after it. We also have a number of people in the company who have really personal, close connections with the disease. And so that's another reason that we also wanted to go after this.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing. Let's take it back to the beginning. How did you decide that career in science, particularly within drug discovery, was for you?
I don't know if I, from the very beginning, knew that drug discovery was where I wanted to go in terms of a career in science, but I did from the time that I was an early kid, since I was honestly 5 years old. I was fascinated by the brain. I remember my dad gave me this encyclopedia CD-ROM for Christmas, and I was talking actually to my grandmother and oddly enough, her boyfriend at the time, who were talking all about the brain and how we only use 10% of our brain. And I thought, wow, we only use 10%. And I got so fascinated by like, how could you use more of your brain? I actually got really into meditating as a kid because of that. But just was always reading about the brain and so curious about sort of like, it just seemed like this undiscovered territory. And so to me, it was really organic in my undergrad and then going into grad school. It's that I wanted to study neuroscience. And so that fascination has always been there. When I did get to the PhD and was working on Parkinson's disease, I really loved that work. I think I started to feel a little bit siloed. You become, in the PhD work, you can oftentimes become very sort of focused into one specific disease or pathway or specific mutation. And I think I'm a little bit more of a generalist and like to have a sort of broader overview of neuroscience and just like the landscape of healthcare and health tech. And so after the PhD, I really felt like I wanted to be in a more collaborative, maybe like business role within science, not just working with mice and cell culture in a dish. And so from there went into consulting and other sort of careers paths that have now led to this today.
What I often hear when I'm interviewing and talking to people within the world, they don't often have such aren't given so much knowledge about industry whilst they're studying for their PhD. How did you find out that was the world for you rather than an academic career?
Yeah, I feel like academia may be shifting a bit, but when I was in the PhD, and I was also fortunate, the program that I did at Boston University was split between computational and more sort of the cell biochemistry sort of sciences, so wet lab and dry lab sciences. And so I think I did have a little bit of a larger overview of the opportunity within science and collaboration. But I think in general, academia, at least when I was going through grad school, there really was you're in academia, that's sort of the tower of where you want to spend your career.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a lot of encouragement to go into industry, and there wasn't a lot of sight or vision on those other career opportunities. We weren't even really supposed to talk about, oh, I don't want to become a professor or run my own lab one day. That was like really like, that's what you're in the PhD to do. And so honestly, for me, it was really saying yes to opportunities that sort of appeared as I was graduating from the PhD program and defending my thesis. I learned about a consulting opportunity that was in medical device and FDA regulations around computer system validation and really helping biotech and pharma companies become more compliant. And this was obviously a totally different world than what I had just been in, but it felt like this new area that I could learn and kind of get my foot into the door in industry and get an understanding of how smaller projects and then larger programs were working. And so I think it was kind of, for me, I think throughout my career, I've not hesitated to take a totally different pivot and learn something entirely new. And sometimes I've thought, look, what am I doing? This has nothing, like, where am I? I'm becoming too broad across the industry. This has nothing to do with anything. But it's been really interesting to see how all of these seemingly disparate careers have really informed the journey and have all sort of collectively come together at different points of
Make
my
the
career.
jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah. So I would say, like, this, like, be open to new experiences.
Talk me through your career story, particularly the parts that have been most formative.
So, I mean, I think that was definitely stepping out of the PhD and going into this new world, which was a little bit scary at the time. You know, would I ever be able to go back to academia if that's something I wanted to do, or where was this going to lead? I didn't want to stay far from the science. But that was really a cool way to get to see how all of these different, at the time, smaller biotechs were working. I was, at Moderna for a little bit. I was in Germany working for Fresenius all through this consultancy. And so got to have kind of this broader overview of the industry. And then I learned about this small, at the time, MIT Media Lab spinout that was building wearable devices using machine learning and AI. Sensor technology to create new digital endpoints. At the time, they had just received the first clearance for an FDA cleared device for detecting seizures and sending an alert to a caregiver. And there were a lot of other opportunities within the neuro and other therapeutic area spaces to really help improve different clinical verticals, but also clinical trials. And they had a program manager role that was open for a clinical trial that they were running with one pharma company at the time. And I was in Germany actually on this project at Fresenius and thought, okay, this sounds really cool. I applied for it and was really excited when I got the job. And again, another world of clinical trials and learning about AI and medical and wearable devices. There was like really, and digital biomarkers and digital health. And because of my background in neuroscience, I got to start to talk about the technology that we were building because there were so many applications that it could really positively influence in the neuro space. And started to go to conferences and talk about the technology, and then started to meet with pharma companies. And during that time, really sort of organically grew into business development. I started to bring in different pharma clients and learned about contract negotiations and weirdly really love like reading through a 80 or 90 page master service agreement and getting to look at the sort of legal language. Like that was always like a puzzle to me. And then negotiating those contracts and bringing these projects forward that could actually really help improve the way that these clinical trials were being run and also the outcomes for patients. It was just this sort of exciting, like finding that sweet spot within these business development deals. And so was there for about 4 years. And I think by the time I left, we had on average, 15 clinical trials that were ongoing with most like a lot of like the larger pharma and smaller mid-sized pharma companies. And then ended up after that leaving, and I went to Regeneron to lead strategic partnerships for global clinical development. And there got to see kind of from the smaller startup, like service provider side, like that was one side of the lens, and then going to Regeneron, this much larger pharma company that had a lot of these resources, and then getting to partner with health systems and hospitals around the world and big tech companies that could really help improve the way that Regeneron was running clinical trials and making them safer and faster and more efficacious for patients, and really seeing how tech and big data could really help improve how these studies were being run was also just like it has felt there's like this continued expansion of what's possible.
Did you have to change the way you work or the way you thought to move into Regeneron in a bigger part of the machine?
Oh, yes. I would say, yeah, and at every step, I think from academia to consulting to a small startup to
Yeah.
Regeneron, which I think admittedly when I was there, they felt like they thought that they were still a startup, even though when I joined there were 10,000 people. They'd grown really fast, so it was just after
Yeah.
COVID. But definitely the digital health startup I was at, they were incredibly scrappy. I mean, you're wearing multiple hats and you do things really fast. I mean, just like the sort of innovation is, on a daily or weekly basis. And definitely when you're at a larger company like Regeneron, there is like unquestionably, and I think it's unavoidable, more bureaucracy. And so
Yeah.
I think the thing that was interesting for me was it was always very easy for me to externally have, sort of sell what we were doing or message out what we were doing. And at a smaller company, I think there's more alignment because
Yeah.
everybody kind of knows what everybody else is doing. And it was interesting going to Regeneron and really having to learn about internally, almost more than externally. It was easy to like externally, we had the purse strings. And so it was kind of like that was the easy part, but really learning to get buy-in internally was a challenge for me and really learning how to navigate that space.
Yeah. And then from Regeneron.
Yeah. So when I was at Regeneron, I'm in Boston. I've been here now since the PhD. So I think it's been like 15 years now, which is crazy. But I was commuting down to Regeneron every week in New York, and that became a little bit much over a little bit over a year. And so I was going to join another pharma company up in Boston that was doing some cool work around radio labeled pharmaceuticals. And I had about 2 months off in between those two jobs. And a friend of mine or a colleague that I met while I was at the digital health startup who spent a lot of time at BARDA, had founded a new sort of venture incubator where he mined for really interesting new technologies, more in like the middle of the US, sort of like the places that don't always have eyes on them. And he found this work out of the University of North Texas with our now CTO, Dr. Jin Liu. And he was telling me about her work. She has a really strong academic background, and they were helping this technology spin out. But they didn't really have anybody on the business side to help put together a deck or a plan that they could help bring to investors and really get this off the ground. And so he said, "Would you help build the deck?" And I said, "All right, yeah, I have some time. I'm happy to help with this." And I just got to learn more about what the possibility was of this technology. And I got so invested in it. I just thought, like, this to me is something that could be a world changing technology. I mean, the potential of this in my mind, and, of course, I'm a little bit biased here, is like you have the possibility to cure any genetic disease with this type of technology. And so if that's something that I can help bring to light, like when am I going to have the opportunity to do something like this? And so I just sort of dove in and said, you know what, okay, I'm going to defer this job offer, which I'm pretty sure is no longer waiting for me at this point. And so now it's been 2 years of building out this startup with our CTO, and it's just been, another like whirlwind of learning. It feels like a entirely new PhD in some ways.
Yeah. And really, again, going back to your seizing of opportunities, being able to spot them and say yes and be brave.
Yeah, I think being brave is important. I think, and also I think for everybody, COVID, I think there was a lot of reflection for people during that time and evaluation of priorities. And I think that it did unlock something where I feel like people don't feel as much like they have to be in, I always say a 9 to 5 job, and I don't think work is ever really 9 to 5, but where you're going into an office, and that sort of disrupted that whole mindset, I guess, like that sort of hamster wheel feeling. And so I think that lent to maybe some of the bravery or saying like, okay, I'm going to try and take this opportunity, that it doesn't have to be this sort of like, I guess what I'm saying is I never expected to be a CEO of a company or an entrepreneur, but when that opportunity showed up, it felt like, okay, this is something that you don't say
You need
no
to grab.
to.
Yeah, you've got to grab it.
Yeah. Life is about experience and adventure. This is certainly, I think, one of the bigger ones for me.
Yeah. So talk to me about those first 6 months.
You know, it was
They must have,
there was nothing about the first 6 months that was really, um, I think it was a kind of a slow unfurling. I mean, we didn't
yeah.
have much money in the company, and it was really kind of getting to learn the space.
Mm,
Genetic medicines was not my PhD focus, and so it was kind of stepping back into like putting back the on the academic hat and relearning a
yeah.
lot of the bio and wet lab work and the gene editing space, and then also really ramping up to understand what's needed to get a business up and running. I'd
Mm,
had a little bit of experience with that through the startup that I worked at for a while. I worked closely with the CEO there. And so I got to see a lot of how he was running the company and the different elements there. So I
mm,
think I've used that as kind of like a map for what needs to be done within Nuclease. But really it was kind of this slow incubation ramp up period
mm,
to pivot from what had always been these sort of quote unquote 9 to 5 jobs to this entirely different world where we're now meeting with different VCs and angel investors and putting together a
mm.
business plan and figuring out how to run something um, that doesn't have a structure just yet.
Yeah.
So creating that structure.
Making the structure. That, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you, aside from the sort of the skills that you need, talk to me about how you get your mindset ready for this huge opportunity in front of you?
Yeah. I that's a good question. I think that, you know, we all have the things in our life that ground us and
Mm,
give us I guess, the sort of settings for framework for how we want to build our lives and what's around us. Maybe for me, something that's been really important since the PhD in grad school, I started practicing this martial art called Aikido,
okay.
and it's a Japanese martial art, and I've been since I started quite passionate. In grad school, I somehow managed to go every day for years,
Wow.
and I don't quite have the time to do it every day anymore, but I still try and go as much as I can. But the thing that I really love about it is that it's a space where you learn a lot of discipline. There's a really
Mm,
there's an element of, in some ways to me, it's like spirituality and respect. There's like a real centeredness that you gain from it. In a world where there's so much thought and distraction, it's a period where you're so centered and focused and just sort of body awareness. But the thing that you get to do in the practice is you're practicing with a partner, and one person is throwing and the other one's being thrown, and you're switching off and you're practicing this technique over and over again, and you do the same thing. You're, maybe like, 20 or 100 times in a single session. And I think what you get to learn is that you never do it perfectly, and you fall down and you get back up and you try again. And so I think that some of the mindset, I guess, to answer your questions, like how do you get into that mindset of
yeah.
doing this bigger thing, is kind of taking those bite-sized pieces and realizing it's never going to be perfect right away, but you just
Yeah.
get up and you keep trying. You just keep doing it, and it's the journey and it's the learning, and there's no need or expectation for it to be perfect the first time. You just always continue to try and do your best. And so I think for me, taking that mentality in, some of the not being resistant to force and things that aren't working, learning how to move around that energy has also
Yeah.
been kind of, I don't know, it's been an
I love it.
important framing for me.
Yeah. But that leads nicely on because I like to talk about the sort of lessons people have learned throughout the career.
Yeah.
What would be your key lessons?
I think going back to sort of frameworks, I think everybody has their own sort of settings for what works for them. I think
Yeah.
for me, finding something that you're curious about is really important. I think finding the thing that sparks your passion, your curiosity, what is going to keep you engaged and learning, is something that will always drive you. And you actually said, I think, Emma, the biggest one for me, which I think is just not being afraid of the fear and just being courageous. So when these opportunities come up that feel a little bit unsettled or uncertain, I remember when I was at the startup, the digital health startup, and having to go on stage and speak about this technology, just feeling so scared the first times and so nervous. And I still do get nervous when I go up on stage, but much less so. And just saying, I'm so terrified of this, but I'm just going to say yes, because I know that the more I do it, I'm going to get better at it and I'm going to learn it. And so I think just don't worry. I said it's not don't be afraid, because you might be afraid, but I think just to be courageous and just to say yes to these opportunities has been a really big lesson for me.
Yeah. And to work through it. It's okay to be scared, like you said, work through it. And
that it's normal. Like, it's normal to feel afraid. It just means that you're human. And I think that that's where bravery and courage comes from, is like, if you don't feel fear, then I don't know if you're really brave or courageous. Like, you need to feel the fear to overcome it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you could give one piece of advice to people who are early in their career, would it be to say yes, or is there another piece of advice that you'd offer?
Yeah. I think in some ways, yes, say yes. Another thing, I've always, like I said, been very interested in the brain, and that has lent to being oftentimes very heady and very logic based. And I think the PhD really pushed me even deeper into that, extreme thought, sort of logic mentality for decision making. But I also mentioned I used to meditate when I was a kid, and I think like there is that element of feeling and kind of centering and sort of the physical and emotional awareness. And so since the PhD, I think something that I've really tried to readopt and get back into is sort of that gut feeling of what feels right for you. And so I think as much as possible, like, so don't say yes to everything, but if you can sort of check in and to pay attention to that feeling of, there is a spark of joy or a feeling of rightness to this thing, even if it's not totally logical. I think, to me, sometimes that's something that I would advise, to kind of keep your eyes and arms open to new opportunities and really check in with what might be an exciting path for you to take. And also, I think, to not be afraid that means that that's what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. Like, I think a lot of people get scared that if, I take this opportunity, that's what I'm going to be doing forever. And you can change at any point. I mean, you can learn many different, you can take many different paths, and they do all eventually come together in some way. And so, I would just say, explore.
That's lovely advice. Thank you very much for sharing. So what's next? What's next for Chelsea? What's next for Neoclease?
So right now that we have a lot going on at Neoclease, we are raising a seed round right now for $5 million. So we're bringing this Parkinson's asset that we've been developing. We've now evaluated, I think, over 65,000 novel editors that we've generated in silico. And we've selected, with the small amount of funding that we have to date, about 100 of them to bring into the wet lab. So we've been really fortunate. We have won 2 what are called golden tickets in Boston. So we have 2 years of wet lab space, which we're now leveraging. Okay. And so we're getting to now see how these editors are going to perform in the wet lab. So that's an exciting step. And as we raise the seed round, which we're, keep your fingers crossed for us, we're in diligence with a potential lead in like sort of the final stages. We get to make this a high throughput process and really start to accelerate the development of this Parkinson's asset. And so getting to bring that into mouse models and development, we've been speaking a lot with the Michael J. Fox Foundation. And so we're just excited about the next steps for the company and really kind of taking it to the next level and hiring and bringing this forward a lot more rapidly. So that's exciting for us. And I think for me, it's really, continuing to learn and grow into this role. I've been really fortunate to have fantastic mentors throughout my career. And so I think continuing to lean on those mentors and a network of fantastic individuals in Boston has been really helpful, and I know it will continue to be. So maybe that's one other piece of advice is I don't think I paid as much attention to my network when I was in the PhD or even when I was in the consulting and startup worlds, but it's just amazing how the people that you meet will continue to kind of, come in and out of your life over the years. And so really, if you meet great people who you admire, just, keep them close. So, don't have to keep them too close, but stay in touch with them, because you never know when they can be really informative for your career later in life.
Thank you so much for sharing, and I can't wait to hear more news as we move forward.
Thank you.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Appreciate it.
But thank you for sharing your story, Chelsea.
Thank you, Emma.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs and insights, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium or TikTok. See you next time.